Hello everybody, good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Pensions the Basics in Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Alice and I'll be presenting the webinar this morning. So a little bit about what we're going to cover in today's session. So I'll start with an introduction, so what automatic enrolment is and your ongoing duties as an employer as well when it comes to pensions. I'll then talk about setting up your pension scheme, so how to do this and what settings to check. How to assess your employees and assign your pension scheme to them, so kind of assessing which worker type your employees are, and also how to assign the scheme to either one or multiple employees. And then we'll move on to checking and amending the contributions. So where to check the pension contributions are calculating, and if you do need to amend them for an individual, how you can do this. So under the Pensions Act 2008, every employer in the UK must put certain employees into a workplace pension scheme and contribute towards it. And this is called automatic enrolment. So if you employ at least one person, you're an employer, and you do have certain legal duties that begin on the day that your first employee started working for you. And this is called your duties start date. Now, I would like to begin with a little bit of an explanation of those 4 steps of automatic enrolment. So first one is going to be to choose a pension scheme, and you'll need to get this set up with your chosen pension provider. So you and your employees will pay money into this scheme to ultimately help your staff pay for their retirement. And there are loads of options out there in terms of which provider to go with and what type of pension scheme to set up for them as well. Next step is working out who to put into the pension scheme and assessing your employees. So you'll need to assess whether the employee's age and wage, what that is to determine their worker category and whether or not they're eligible for automatic enrolment. You'll also need to write to your staff, so this must be done within 6 weeks of the duty start date, and you're going to write to them to explain how automatic enrolment applies to them. This can be done by sending pension correspondence letters to your employees. And then 4th step of automatic enrolment is to declare your compliance. So you've got 5 months after your duty start date to do this, and it's basically declaring that your workplace pension is compliant and all of the information that you've provided is accurate. And if you would like to know a little bit more or a bit more detail on these 4 steps, I have linked an article at the bottom which will take you to the Pensions Regulator website. Once you've completed these 4 steps, your duties don't end there. You do still have ongoing duties as an employer. These are to assess your employee's age and wage each time you pay them to see if they need to be put into the pension scheme. And you can do this manually or via the pension assessment. Every 3 years, you'll need to carry out re-enrolment duties, such as re-enrolling any employees who've left your scheme. You also need to continue paying into your pension scheme, and this includes checking that you're paying at least the minimum contribution levels, which is currently 3% employer minimum and 8% total minimum contribution. So that's the employer and employee combined. And you also need to manage requests to join or leave the scheme and keep records of this too. So an employee can write to you as the employer and ask to join your scheme, and you must do this within a month of receiving the request. In terms of leaving or opting out of the scheme, the employee will in most cases need to request this through the pension provider, and then you'll need to opt them out in payroll and provide a refund of the contributions if necessary. So I did just want to start with a bit of an explanation of those duties before we dive into the next section, which is going to be setting up your pension scheme. So it is nice and easy to set up the scheme in Sage 50 Payroll as long as you've got the information that you'll need, as these settings will determine how the pension contributions are calculated. So what type of scheme do you operate? For example, GPP or stakeholder? Is it a qualifying scheme for automatic enrolment? And does it use qualifying earnings for pensionable pay? And if not, what pay elements are going to be pensionable? Is it a salary sacrifice scheme? What are your contributions? So are they fixed or a percentage? And how much? Are the employee contributions deducted before or after tax? And what is your provider reference? So that's the information that you'll need to know to set it up. And if you are unsure about any of these and how your pension scheme is set up, your pension provider will be able to provide this information for you. So do double check this and make sure you've got that correct information. Now, in terms of setting up the scheme in Payroll, I've just got some screenshots here before we go into the demo. You'll go to your company tasks and click on pension schemes. And in here, you do have some default kind of generic pension schemes, which you can rename and edit. So in here, you can change the settings and the contributions to match your pension scheme. And once that scheme is set up, you will also need to check your pay elements for pension contributions to determine whether they're going to be included or excluded from your pension scheme calculations. So if the payment counts towards qualifying earnings, you'll see a tick box just in the middle of the screen called qualifying earnings, and you'll just need to tick this. Payments that count towards qualifying earnings are things like salary, commission, bonuses, statutory payments too, and I've just got a few more examples there on the right-hand side. Other than this, if the payment should be used to calculate pension contributions, there are some other pension tick boxes too. So you've got pension main, pension AVC, so this is an additional voluntary contribution made by the employee, and there is also a salary sacrifice box for pensions too. So if you've got a salary sacrifice pension scheme and you want that payment to go towards that contribution. And you would need to click edit on the relevant pay elements and kind of repeat the checking of these tick boxes for each of them, as Payroll will use these settings along with the pension scheme settings itself to calculate the contributions. So without further ado, let's dive into the demonstration, and I'm going to show you the pension scheme settings and the pay element settings as well. So I'm logged into my company and I'm just going to go straight to pension schemes, which is found in the company tasks and just below settings in the top left. In here you can see the default schemes I mentioned already set up, but you can see I've already added my two schemes there. So I've got my nest pension and I've also got a salary sacrifice pension as well. And at the bottom of this window, you can leave this blank like me, but you do have the option of entering an enrolment review date. So this is the date that you would next need to review your pension schemes for automatic enrolment. So select my first scheme and I'm going to click on edit. You might get this message as well. This just means it's in use by at least one employee. So I can click OK. And these are the pension scheme settings. So there are 4 tabs along the top. We've got details, employee, employer and provider. We'll start in the details tab and you can see Payroll automatically assigns a reference number to the scheme. This can't be changed, hence why it's greyed out. You've then got the option of adding a description. So this is the name of your scheme. I've just called mine Nest Pension. And it's in a case of selecting in the drop-down the type of pension scheme that you've got. So there are some which will apply the relevant settings of the scheme type automatically, but if you can't see your scheme type in here, you do also have the option of clicking Other, where you can select the specific settings manually. The next kind of 4 options here, these are types of schemes which aren't used anymore, so we'll ignore them for now. But then you've got things like GPP, so a group personal pension, or PPP, so a personal pension plan. So you've got some more kind of common ones down there. I'm just going to select Other, but do remember if you are unsure to check with your pension provider. The next setting is a SCON or a scheme contracted out number, which is no longer relevant since the contracted out schemes have been abolished. So I am going to leave that blank. And then under this, we've got a few different tick boxes which relate to the automatic enrolment schemes. So I've got qualifying scheme and use qualifying earnings for pensionable pay. Qualifying scheme should be ticked to indicate that your pension scheme is a qualifying scheme. So that means it hits the minimum requirements set by the pensions regulator for use with automatic enrolment workplace pension schemes. The next tick box is for schemes that use qualifying earnings for pensionable pay, and this will apply to more recent schemes since the introduction of automatic enrolment. So on the presentation, I did give a list of the payments included in qualifying earnings, things like bonus, commission, basic wages, but essentially it's any payment subject to tax and national insurance. And the pension contributions for these will be calculated on earnings between an upper and lower threshold. You can find those thresholds in the company legislation, but for a monthly employee, for example, the lower threshold is £520 and the upper threshold is £4,189. And the other main setting on this tab is just this last tick box at the bottom. So if your scheme is a salary sacrifice pension scheme, do make sure to tick this box. The contributions will work slightly differently for them. So there's not a direct employee contribution, it's more a salary sacrifice amount instead. So I will be showing you my salary sacrifice pension scheme that I've set up, along with where to check the contributions for this a little bit later in the webinar. But that's the details tab. So let's move on to the employee tab. At the top, we've got a drop down where you can choose the contribution. So is it a percentage or a fixed amount? I've just got mine set to a percentage and 5. So that's 5% of the employee's qualifying earnings. And on the right, you can see that the include statutory payments tick boxes are automatically selected and greyed out. And that's actually because in the details tab, we selected to use qualifying earnings for pensionable pay. And statutory payments do count towards that. And the kind of other important setting I do want to show you on this tab is the tick box here, deduct before tax. So this relates to the tax relief agreement, and you'll need to make sure that you've set up your scheme to either deduct before tax if your scheme uses something known as a net pay tax relief agreement, or after tax, which would mean that the tick box would be cleared or unticked, and that's known as a relief at source agreement. And the way that the after tax would work is that you would deduct the pension after tax, but then you would reduce the contribution by 20%, which is the basic rate of tax, and that's going to be claimed back by the pension provider directly from HMRC. But Payroll does all of those calculations for you according to these settings. If you are curious how the pension contributions are calculated as well, we are actually running a webinar on pension calculations, so do come along to that if you want to know a little bit more and kind of dive into the detail of that as well. Moving on to the employer tab, so same settings here in terms of pension or fixed amount. I've just got mine set to percentage in 3 for the employer, so that means combined I've got employer as 3, employee as 5%, and I've met that minimum requirement of 8%. And last but not least, you've got the provider tab. So this is where you can enter the provider details, such as the name and address. You provide a reference number at the bottom and any kind of administrative details that you would wish to pop in as well. So that's the setup of my scheme and some more information about the settings. I just want to point out those more important settings again. So on the details tab, you've got the use qualifying earnings for pensionable pay. And on the employee tab, you've got the deduct before tax. And again, if you're unsure, do check with your pension provider. So I'm just clicking OK to close that scheme. And while I'm here, I will just show you the salary sacrifice one as well. Again, just click OK to this message. And we can see the same settings and options in here, only this time I've got the salary sacrifice tick box ticked. Now, one thing that does is actually remove the deduct before tax tick box in the employee tab, as that option is not a relevant setting for this type of pension scheme. But I've still got the 5% and 3%, and I also still have the tick boxes ticked for qualifying scheme and use qualifying earnings for pensionable pay. So they were the pension scheme settings. And I would also like to show you how to check your pay elements as well. So remember, you'll need to check these to make sure that any pay elements that should be included in the pension calculations have got the correct settings for this. And you'll find those still in the company tasks, 2 options below pension schemes, just on pay elements. And I've got a few set up in this company. So payments that are included in qualifying earnings, like I said, include things like salary, bonus, commission. So I am going to check my pay elements and just make sure they're correct. I'll start with basic pay. So I'll just select this one and click edit. And the settings we're bothered about are the tick boxes in the middle here in the section, this payment is subject to. So you can see I've got qualifying earnings ticked. So this pay element is going to be counted towards the qualifying earnings. And pretty much all payments subject to tax and national insurance should have this ticked. I've then got pension main and pension AVC ticked, as we do want to include this basic pay element as pensionable for the main contribution and any additional voluntary contributions too. And since I've got a salary sacrifice pension scheme, I'd have also ticked the salary sacrifice tick box. And that means that this pay element is fully pensionable and also part of the qualifying earnings as well. So that's my basic pay. Next one I want to check is expenses. So this one's slightly different. I do want to just check that this has got these boxes cleared, as expenses don't count towards the qualifying earnings and they're not going to be included in the pension calculations. So we can see those boxes are unticked and that pay element is fine. Next, I'll check my commission pay element. Now this is going to be subject to be included towards the qualifying earnings, so I do have that ticked. However, my specific pension scheme only requires the actual basic pay to be included in the calculations for the contributions. So as a result, I've left the pension tick boxes unticked. So it is counted towards qualifying earnings, but not included in the calculations for the contributions. And it's the same story for my overtime as well. Qualifying earnings, it is ticked, but not counted towards the actual calculations for the contributions there. And that's kind of how you would check those pay elements. Now, a little top tip from me as well, so if you have a lot of pay elements to check through, there is a report called the Payment Types Report. I would advise running this, and this will show you all of the settings of your pay elements, so you can more effectively check which ones are subject to pension already, which ones aren't. Same with the qualifying earnings as well. You'd then be able to see which ones you need to change, if any, so that should save you a little bit of time. And that's called the Payment Types Report. So a little bit of a recap of what we did there. So setting up the pension scheme according to the information that you've got from the pension provider, and you'll do that in the company tasks and pension schemes. And then checking that the pay elements are set up as well, and whether or not they're going to be included towards the qualifying earnings and towards the pension calculations. The next section of the webinar is going to be assessing employees and assigning your scheme. So as part of your ongoing duties as an employer, you must assess your employees each time you pay them. You can do this manually, which I'll be going through today, or if you're a pensions module user, via the pension assessment. And we do have a separate webinar coming up going through all things pension assessment. So you'll assess your employees to determine which worker category they fall into. This could be eligible, non-eligible, or entitled. Eligible employees are the worker category who must be automatically enrolled into the pension scheme. So a little bit about these worker types. You've got the three here. Entitled is for employees aged 16 to 74 working in the UK earning below £6,240, and these employees have a right to join the scheme if they wish. Eligible is for employees aged 22 to state pension age, working in the UK, earning above £10,000. And these employees are the ones who do need to be automatically enrolled into the scheme. So even if they don't want to be part of the pension scheme, you must still carry out your automatic enrolment duties, and the employees will then have the opportunity to opt out if they wish. And last but not least, you've got non-eligible employees. These are people aged 16 to 21, or state pension age to 74, working in the UK, earning above £10,000, or employees aged 16 to 74, working in the UK, earning between £6,240 and £10,000. And these employees have a right to opt into the scheme. So those are the worker types. And whether you assess the employees manually or via the pension assessment, three things are going to be checked for your employees. And that is their age, their UK worker status, and their wage. So to manually assess them, starting with the age, you'll check your process date and go to the employee's record, and you'll find the employee's age is on the right-hand side of the Personal tab underneath the date of birth. To check the UK worker status, it's still in the record, but you'll go to the Employment tab and you just need to check if the non-UK worker box is selected or cleared. And finally, for their wage, again, check your process date set to your next pay date and open up Enter Payments. In the Information tab, there's a little Pensions folder on the left, and you can check the qualifying earnings this period in there. And once you've assessed your employees and you know who is eligible and needs to be automatically enrolled, it'll then be time to assign the scheme to your employee. So a pension scheme can be assigned manually in the employee record or automatically via the pension assessment for those of you who are pensions module users. If you are a pensions module user, do not assign the pension scheme manually in the record. It is important to let the pension assessment do all that for you. So let's actually just dive straight into a demo of how to manually assign a pension scheme. Now, for the sake of this webinar, I have actually already assigned the pension scheme to my employees, but let's take a look at where you would do this. So I'll use my first 2 employees as an example, and I'm just going to open up the record. I'll go to Pensions and Manage Schemes. As I said, I do have one there for them already, but if you did want to add a pension scheme to them, you just need to click Add, select the scheme type, the scheme reference, pop in a joint scheme date, and you're going to check and amend those contributions at the bottom if you do need. So it does assign the kind of default that you set up with the pension scheme, but they are editable if you need to edit them. So again, let me just show you with my next employee how to add the scheme. You go to Manage Schemes, Add, select the scheme reference, add a joint scheme date, and just double check those contributions at the bottom as well. Now, if you are introducing a new pension scheme to your employees, or you've just generally got a lot of people to add, you don't have to individually do it in their record. You are able to use something called a global change to add it to all of your employees at once, or highlight the required employees and use a global change to add it to your selection. So let me just swap my selection. Let's say I want to add my salary sacrifice scheme to these 3 remaining employees. I'll highlight them. I'll go to Tasks, Global Changes, Pensions, and Add Pension Scheme. All I'll need to do in here is find that salary sacrifice pension scheme in the drop-down, select whether it's going to be the primary scheme for the employees, and click OK. And that is going to make those changes for me. So that's an option to add it to multiple employees at once, and that'll just save you from having to do it individually in their employee records. So that was how to assign a pension scheme individually in the employee record or to multiple people using a global change. So remember, that's Tasks, Global Changes, Pensions, and Add Pension Scheme. And just a reminder, you can find all of the information that I've put on the slides if you download the handouts from today's webinar, just using the piece of paper icon on your screen. And that does bring us on to the last section of the webinar, which is actually going to be checking those pension contributions and how to amend them as well if necessary. So I've got 2 pension schemes, as you've seen, and the way that you view the employee and employer contributions are slightly different for each. So I'm going to show you both, but they're both seen in Enter Payments. So once you've set up and assigned your scheme, you can check that it's calculating and Enter Payments and view those contributions, which we'll see in the demo shortly. And I did touch on this before, but you also have the option of amending an employee's pension contribution. Even if they're in the same pension scheme as other employees, if you go into the employee's record, you can amend their individual contribution. So let's just dive straight back into the demo, and we're going to check those contributions in Enter Payments first. So I'll highlight my 2 example employees again. I'm going to right click and go to enter payments. Got the payments in this first tab, so remember that we'd specified whether we wanted these to be included or excluded from the qualifying earnings and the pension calculations. Then if I go to the summary tab, again, payments on the left and deductions on the right. So I've actually got the employee pension contributions just here, showing as £79.20. So that's where you'll find the employee's contributions. And this is for the employee on my Nest pension scheme. To find the employer contributions, you'll see the employer's box at the bottom. Click on this and I can see the current pension for this period for the employer is £59.40. So that's where you'll check the employer. And let me just move on to my next employee. Remember, this employee was the person on a salary sacrifice scheme. So it looks like there's nothing calculating. I can't see any employee contributions in here, but that's actually because the employee and employer are combined in the employer box for a salary sacrifice scheme. So that does show a little bit differently. It is still calculating the employee's contribution, but that's showing slightly differently in here with that combined amount. So that is a way that you can check those pension contributions are calculating. And I do just want to pop into the employee record actually. And a little top tip from me, you can click this icon in the top left of enter payments. That's like a shortcut to the record. So that way you don't have to close down where you are in enter payments. I'm just going to pop back to pensions and show you where to amend those contributions. So if you do need to amend an individual's contributions for any reason, you can go back to manage schemes, back to edit, and you're just able to review them down here. So let's say I change this employee's pension contributions to a fixed amount of £100. I'll just save this record. And if I go back to enter payments, I can see straight away that change reflected there. So the pension contributions for the employee is now £100. But of course, the employer is still remaining at that percentage in 3%. So that is kind of how to override and amend the contribution. And that would remain the same as that new amount until it's manually changed back again in the employee record. So that's how to view the contributions and amend them if necessary. So you'll view the contributions and enter payments. You've got the employees on the left in the deductions, on the right in the deductions, and just at the bottom in the employers box, you've got the employer pension contributions. And do remember, for a salary sacrifice scheme, that will show as a combined amount in the employer box. And if you do need to amend the contributions, just a reminder, you'll do that in Manage Schemes and Edit. And at the bottom, you've got the option of amending from a percentage in a fixed amount or just changing the number as well. And that does bring us to the end of the main content for Pensions the Basics. But before we do wrap things up and kind of take a little look at those questions, I do want to just go through a little bit of further support with you as well. So for webinars, me and Duncan do run these throughout the year for Sage 50 Payroll. We've got loads of pension-related webinars coming up this month, including dates on things like the pension assessment, pension calculations, pension re-enrolment as well. So if you do want to know more about those, we do have those more focused topics coming up. Just click register now to take a look at those dates. We also have the Sage Help Centre, so here you can search the knowledge base, you can access support guides, demonstration videos. It's a really, really handy resource. All of the articles which I've linked on the slides today have all come from the Help Centre, so it's something that we use as well at Sage. And last thing from me, completely free resource is Sage University. So here you can set up a free account, you can access e-learning and bite-sized learning. It's a great way to expand your knowledge on Sage 50 Payroll. You can earn product certification too, so that's a great one. But that is it for the webinar. So keep an eye on your emails for a recording of this coming through to you. You can rewatch that as many times as you need, take a little bit of a closer look at the demonstrations and the slides as well. But I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully we'll see you on another webinar very soon. And on behalf of me and Duncan, we'll see you next time. Goodbye.